Good afternoon, everyone, and welcome to our Future of Controls webinar. In the interest of time, we will kick off now. We have I suppose, a very interesting panel for you today, today we'd like to cover, I suppose, what Deloitte's vision of Future of Controls is, how it can deliver value to your organisation, and also highlight the positive impact that a Future of Controls implementation can have. My name is Linda Neal. I'm a director in our risk advisory practice, working in internal controls, and I'm your MC today. Our host for today's session is David Kinsella, who leads our risk advisory practice nationally. David has delivered a number of control implementation and transformation projects to some of Ireland's largest PLCs, who are seeking listing on the Irish Stock Exchange, UK Stock Exchange, and the US Stock Exchange. Prior to David's time in Deloitte, he worked in the banking industry, and he continues to work in banking, but also across a number of sectors, including technology, consumer goods, and retail. Our panelists today are Kieran Tracy. So Kieran is, Kieran is director in our risk advisory practice, and he leads our Future of Controls practice in Ireland. He specialises in internal controls and has led a number of control implementation and transformation projects with our clients in Ireland. And he also leads the regular testing of control frameworks for listed and regulated entities in Ireland, including SOX and ISAE programmes. We're joined also by Dan Mowbray from our UK practice. Dan is a Future of Controls technology lead with over 15 years experience in control, data analytics and technology. And he works with some of the UK's largest global organisations across a range of industries to transform the way they manage risk and controls. Dan also leads our risk and digital transformation practice in risk advisory in the UK. So just some housekeeping for today. We have over 170 participants registered for today's event, and we would like to have a very engaging panel discussion. So if you do have any questions, please drop them into the chat box. We may not get to them all today, but we will be doing a follow-up on Thursday with the recording and some follow-up publications. So we'll try and address any unanswered questions in that correspondence on Thursday. So if you have any follow-up questions that you don't put in the chat box, you can also reach out to any member of the panel. So without further ado, I'll pass you on to David Kinsella to open the session.
Super, thanks Linda. And look, as Linda says, a massive welcome to everybody. Yeah, we had over 175 registrations when we put this out, and the response was immediate. I think that just shows it's really a sign of this is something that is top of mind for lots and lots of people. This is the first of a series of webinars and events that we're going to run on Future Controls. I think what we're going to do is, the future sessions will be a little bit more pointed and deep dives on particular areas. So again, as we go through this session or afterwards, do please give us any feedback in relation to any particular areas or topics that you'd like us to sort of do a deeper dive onto in future events. And say we hope that this will be a series that people will enjoy and participate in. I think the objective for today is really, I suppose, to share some insights in relation to when we talk about future controls, what does that mean from a Deloitte perspective, and where do we see this going? And really to share some practical insights based on some of the work that we're doing in this space, and say that's why Kieran and Dan are going to bring us through that. I think, look, we're currently working with a number of clients at various different stages in their maturity. So some clients who are building out control frameworks for the first time as part of a proposed transaction, either in the immediate future or down the line, but also lots of mature organizations who have quite mature control frameworks and SOX programs, where they have hundreds and hundreds of controls and key controls supposedly, but really I suppose what they're looking at is actually how do they rationalize those and make them more efficient. I think historically, to some degree, controls and controls frameworks have been seen as an admin burden, backward looking, but I think given the scale of regulatory, technological and societal changes, we're seeing the demand for more insight and more value add from our control environments and control frameworks. I think it's about controls that are keeping pace with technology changes in your organizations. Your organizations are adopting AI, RPA, chatbots. It's really about actually making sure we look at how we use those technologies as well in the control environment to actually help us make it more efficient and more effective. Essentially, lots of the conversations we're having with clients every day is really, they're striving to do more with less. So it's about getting more comfort, getting and giving more assurance about those controls, but doing it with less control. So it's about being efficient. It's using technology, but also it's about being clear what is a key control, and actually what are the roles and responsibilities across the 3 lines of defense to facilitate that. As I say, we're looking forward to an insightful discussion. Linda referenced the Q&A. Really do encourage people to put their questions up there. I know we've a couple of things just to get the guys going, but to say people can, we'll pick those up as we go through the session, and if we can, to say we'll consider those as part of our future series in terms of making sure we pick up other topics going forward. So again, just a massive welcome. Delighted you're able to join us, and to say look forward to a really good session. So with that, I'll hand us back to Linda.
Thanks, David. So before we get into the meat of today's discussion, we did really want to just sort of pause and take stock of where today's participants are in their control journey. So we have our first poll question actually for you guys, just to see where you are. So how would you describe your current control environment? And we have a choice of 5 there. So the initial is kind of an ad hoc informal control environment. Repeatable is quite a documented and repeatable, but very inconsistent across the organization and within departments itself. Defined then is documented and repeated in a consistent format. Managed refers to kind of managed processes which use outputs across the business. And finally, optimized is an integrated, structured and consistent processes, which is optimizes the benefits from the processes. So we'll just give you a couple of minutes or a couple of 30 seconds really to vote and let us know where you are, and it'll hopefully just frame today's discussion. So just a couple more seconds for anyone thinking about where they are in that journey. And we'll just see now if we have results. Yeah, I mean, I think that probably does reflect very much what we expected. The majority of participants, over 50%, are sitting in that defined and managed bucket. And then we have a very small population in the more optimized structure, and a larger population sitting in the kind of initial and repeatable. And I think that's not unsurprising given where the environment has been, the regulatory environment has been for kind of non-financial services businesses over the last number of years. So I suppose with that in mind, first question is for Kieran today. So maybe you could just tell us, we are in an era of immense change, and we're seeing a lot more requirements come down the track. Can you just tell us, what is Deloitte's future of controls vision?
Thanks, Linda, and good afternoon to everybody. It's great to see so many people interested in this topic. So Clara, if you just roll on the slide. So what the future of controls is Deloitte's vision of control, best-in-class controls that we've identified through decades-long working with some of the biggest and best and most successful organizations throughout the globe. And we put these together in what we call our future of controls vision, or our future of controls journey. So one of the common things that we've seen across those businesses, that organizations had an internal controls roadmap that fitted neatly with their business objectives, and that supports achievement of the business's strategy and goals. And we really found that was quite common. But when we took a look at each one of those roadmaps and we pulled them apart, we identified 3 key levers across those. First of all was the controls framework itself, and the approach to designing or redesigning and updating a fully risk-based controls framework. Now, I'm pretty sure that everybody on this call will say, we have a risk-based framework, we've got risk-based controls because we identify those, but have we really interrogated those risks, assessed those risks, to determine the types of controls that we need for our business to be successful and to add value to the business. And we'll take you through that lever later on this morning. Just bear that thought in mind. The second piece is the culture and the operating model in which your control environment operates, and really how we embed controls in organizations. That's the second lever, which is quite common across these organizations. And the third piece, which becomes more and more prominent with every day, is the technology enablement piece. And it's great to have Dan on the call today. He's going to talk to us around the technology ecosystem, very important. So those three levers, when you put them together, they are Deloitte's future of controls vision, and the vision which we believe is important to bring your organizations forward. Now, we realize that if an organization decides to take on the future of controls journey, that will vary depending on a number of factors. You know, your existing maturity around your control environment. You know, we had organizations that have just responded to our poll who said that, 6% in the initial, so that's a bit of a curve you have to go along. Some organizations are right up there and managed and optimized, so they have pieces to do, but this is never going to be a one and done scenario. This is going to be continually improving, investing in your controls function to meet the evolving landscape and risk dynamics that we're seeing as organizations. And I suppose those evolving risks and changing dynamics are really what's driving the future of controls agenda for us. So, Clara, if we jump to the next slide, we can take a look at some of those. Now, when I flash this on screen, it's almost like a question for myself: where do I start? I mean, going back to early 2020 when we had thankfully past us, the COVID crisis. Since then, we've been in a situation of effectively perma-crisis. I'll pull out a couple of these, but ultimately we've got, war in Ukraine, we've got increased costs of living crisis, we've got cost pressures coming at us from every angle at a personal and a business level, and we've got changing regulatory dynamics as well. So I'm going to pull a couple of these out just to rest on them for a minute. So the first one is, which transcends all areas, is the digital and technology. So one of the pieces of feedback that I certainly get, and I'm sure a lot of you guys and ladies could refer to also, is that when we speak to executive stakeholders and audit committee chairs and chief compliance officers, we get told we only realize, or we're only made aware of risk issues after they've occurred. There's very little predictive, or there's very little signposting that we see typically coming at us as businesses in relation to the threats that might appear along the horizon. And that's largely because controls are typically manual in nature, and they're detective, and they're cumbersome, and they can be difficult sometimes to operate and costly to test afterwards. That's what we believe the future of controls journey should be focused around: analytics and automated solutions and digitized controls that effectively monitor risk events and predict internal control failures before they happen, allowing us to have, as risk and control practitioners, the arsenal to come along and respond to those in a timely way. And I suppose one of the challenges that we did see over the past number of years really jumping onto the agenda was supply chain. I've worked with a number of FTSE organizations and large Irish corporations, and when I speak to the C-suite, one thing that's continually on their agenda is supply chain and supply chain risk. And what we see a huge amount of investment in is the digitization of the supply chain, but we haven't really seen a corresponding investment in the digitization of the controls that are needed along that supply chain for it to be successful, to deliver on the goals and objectives of the function, and to deliver value to the business. Recently, we performed some analysis of data for a client and found that there was a high number of processing transactions by third parties, and we identified risk issues through that analysis, which the existing risk and control frameworks just weren't able to cope with. So by doing that, we were able to support them in developing digitized controls, overlaying that with some data analysis, and allowing them to have a proper suite, an effective suite of supply chain risks that they could identify, track, manage, and ultimately control. So we found that to be very positive. One of the other trends that's really driving the future of controls is the era of the consumer. We see now that consumers have a very strong ability to switch between suppliers, switch between the businesses that they deal with. They have very high levels of expectations around things like integrity, like trust, expectations around how the business that they deal with the environment and their sustainability commitments, and we see those as being a big driver on future of controls. The expectation of consumers that what they buy and what they invest in has been delivered to them in a controlled manner. They can get things when they want them. They can be delivered on a timely basis, and they've got their data secured and their payments secured in purchasing those items. so that's a kind of a whistle-stop tour of what we're seeing. Some of the kind of key factors that are changing, impacting the future of controls landscape. One more item, maybe two items that before we jump off. The other one is climate. You know, the whole area of climate risk management is a very new area for us. It's been growing and growing, and now it has exploding. But the controls haven't really stayed pace with climate risk management, and they haven't been able to, and what we've had to date clearly hasn't been good enough. So organizations haven't had really robust controls framework around climate risk management. That's going to be mandated now, not only by our customers, but by our clients, the consumers, and also the regulators. Big changes coming at an EU level across all industries around reporting around climate impacts and the risk posed by businesses to the climate, which is something that's very clearly close to our own heart. We also see a lot of change around regulations and the move towards risk-based regulation. So that gives us as a businesses the opportunity to really zone in on the risk and effectively manage the costs associated with regulatory compliance. For a long time, that's only been going one way, and that's up. But now with the move towards risk-based regulation, there's an opportunity to refine and optimize our risk and control frameworks to focus on the risks and controls that matter. Linda, does that help you along in terms of what we're talking about?
Yeah, it definitely does. Thank you, Kieran. And maybe, you know, just to follow up on that, Daniel, like obviously a huge part of the future of control seems to be tech enablement. So could you maybe just explain to us, I suppose, what the technology ecosystems are for the future of controls?
Yeah, absolutely. And good afternoon, everybody. So about 5 years ago, when we started to look at building out the future of controls proposition, we sort of asked ourselves, you know, if we were to do SOX again, you know, how would we do that given the tools, technologies, etc., that are now available to us that perhaps weren't around when Sarbanes-Oxley first came through. And we explored, you know, technologies that have been around for quite some years. So GRC products been around for, you know, 10, 12 years in earnest. They've grown in maturity significantly, and this is a really, really hot topic for software vendors at the moment, and the competitive nature between those software vendors to create more and more functionality on these platforms to manage the different risk domains is really encouraging. And actually a lot of our clients were having conversations with swapping out older technologies that they've had for say 10 years for some of these new up and coming quite innovative GRC solutions that we're seeing at the moment. Similarly, we look to our external audit practice and practices that have been around in sort of second and third line of defense for quite some time around analytics. And how can we use data and analytics to integrate real insight and monitoring into a technology ecosystem that better helps us manage risk and control. So then we'd started to segment that into, you know, what do we control? So you've got your integrated GRC platform or integrated risk management platforms as they're becoming now. How do we use those analytic capabilities that have existed for a while and are now quite commonplace in organizations to really identify emerging risk and issues in control that can inform that GRC platform as to status of the risk and control environment? And then real-time dashboarding across all risk domains for an enterprise that has different lenses for all of the lines of defense. So first line of defense being able to use that as a tool to optimize the way that they manage their risks and controls. And for second line of defense, how do they monitor areas of under and over control? How do they monitor the performance of the framework? And then also breaking down those barriers between the business and the third line of defense. You know, how do we share that data asset so that we're targeting assurance in the right areas, and we're not banging into each other and from a second line of defense doing some work over here, internal audit doing some similar work, when actually the data is telling us that work doesn't actually need to be done. And then we'll start to look about how do we transform the way that we actually control. So making use of control automation, so your ERP controls, how do we use automation platforms to drive processes and ultimately better control processes? Again, how do we use those analytic assets to really get deep insight into our business processes? How do we use that to do CCM, continuous control monitoring, and integrate that back into that integrated risk management platform? And then thirdly, how do we assure all of this? How do we use these technologies to automate and drive a really efficient assurance process? So the use of automated testing tools, control analytics, RPA, etc., are all the things that we considered and put into this technology ecosystem.
So is this just about technology then? Maybe Kieran, can you?
Thanks, Linda, and thanks, Dan. That technology is a very important, and perhaps one might even say the coolest part of future of controls, but it's not the only part. The other two levers have a significant weight in the overall delivery of a program such as this. So if we jump to the next slide, I might talk a little bit around the reconstructing or the constructing of your internal controls framework and what that means. This methodology, what this means, I mean, how it can help you to really pinpoint the types of controls you wish to identify and operate to manage the real risks that matter to your business. So we do this across 4 ways, really. So the first step is to define the most important risks to your organization impacting the achievement of your strategy, articulating your risk appetite, underpinning those risks, which then informs your future of controls target operating model. The second piece then is taking those risks and optimizing them to define your critical risks and future of control strategy. So we're not suggesting that you control every risk that the business deals with, just those risks that have a real impact and that are outside of your risk tolerances and appetite statements. So in doing that, then, to be really successful, you need to move away from manual controls. You need to focus on smart controls, leveraging, as Daniel alluded to, continuous controls monitoring, automation, digitization, and as we move further along the AI journey, embedding AI into some of your controls framework, not just to deliver processes, but also to deliver controls and to deliver assurance potentially in time to come. And we might talk about that later on and get some insight on Daniel and see where that journey is heading to. The third piece is around embedding the controls, and you need to develop training and technology enablement as part of a change program to bring your stakeholders along. Without those stakeholders at the first line and second line, coming along with you, it really will be a challenge to get the controls framework up and running. So that really talks around winning over the hearts and minds of organizations. And one thing that we've seen is really linking back your risks and your controls back to business objectives that your first line management are trying to deal with on a day-to-day basis. That really then makes the control very tangible as it links right back to what they're doing in terms of what their daily, weekly, monthly objectives are. The fourth piece around reconstructing the controls framework is on the reporting. And I wouldn't underscore this to any extent. It's really important that you get reporting right in both that it paints a picture of your current risk profile, and also that it paints a picture of what are the types of risks that are on the horizon for your business and what we can do to address those risks before they materialize. It's very important. So there is some dynamic reporting ways to do this and some automation around reporting that are proving to be quite effective. We use some of them in our own business. And these are easy and cost effective to implement and operate. So that's definitely a route that I would recommend people go down. But just to kind of to recap on what we're saying here, the main core of this is around defining the risks that really matter to your business, identifying what your risk appetite is in relation to those risks, then optimizing those risks and the associated controls, and layering those with technology enablement. So you're not just going to spreadsheet, monthly review that's signed off with an email or something on those lines. That really isn't the way forward. And as there's more and more investment in things like digitalization, the manual controls just won't cut it any further. So to be a tech-enabled digital business, you do need to have tech-enabled and digital controls underpinning those. So that's talks to the reimagining or reconstructing your internal controls framework, which I'm sure lots of businesses have spent many hours and many years developing and redefining, but really trying to push this forward to make it really crisp and to the point on the risks that matter to your business. So Clara, if you can jump to the next slide, we'll talk about what is definitely not the coolest part of the future of controls, but definitely a very important part and a very challenging area to get right for your business. And that's around getting the cultural fit right for your future of controls operating model. And we've identified 3 principles, which are underpinned by 4 enablers around fitting the culture to your organization around future of controls. So the first one of those is, and it's really probably the biggest challenge, particularly for organizations that are embarking on this journey for the first time or at the very early stages of developing their controls maturity. And that is first line ownership and accountability. So like, as I suggested earlier on, one way to do this is really linking back, ensuring that the risks they're identifying are linking back to the business objectives that first line have, and being there to support them afterwards with training and enablement. So not making, controls that are difficult to operate, cumbersome, and it just end up people getting, wrapped on the knuckles from time to time when things don't go to plan. So that's really the first challenge. The second piece is developing a shared ambition for your organization. So, risk and control isn't about identifying deficiencies or gaps and creating workload. It's about developing the controls that help your business to perform and add value. So your executives can be confident and have comfort in the knowledge that they can go about their business and deliver a strategy because they have the backbone of a robust risk and controls framework that helps them to deliver their daily day-to-day duties and the strategy for the business. The third principle that we've identified is this integrated second line. And maybe some people are wondering what we mean on this one. So what we have seen over the past number of years is the number of second line functions increasing. So we've got risk, we've now got the climate risk management functions and climate reporting and sustainability reporting functions and a number of other functions. They haven't always been intertwined, they haven't always been integrated. So there's an awful lot of loss of value there. There was increased cost that we're not getting a good return on. So integrating those functions is very important also. In addition to that, what we have seen recently is in relation to control and compliance areas is the mixing of some onshore and offshore resourcing, which again adds a layer of complexity to second line functions, making it difficult for them all to operate in sync and together. So moving down to some of the enablers that we have around developing your culture around future of controls. First one, interesting topic, incentives. So building incentives around controls is this topic that not every organization has fully grasped. And that number, we have seen some of the larger organizations have a controls element linked to bonus for really top executives. So then they realize what the impact of performing controls or non-performance of controls has at the end of the day to them personally. So they're very then focused on ensuring that the risk and control frameworks are adequately defined, implemented and operated across the business. And they become part of the day-to-day regular conversations with their team members as part of check-ins and one-to-ones. The second piece is building the capability, and that is enhancing the capability of the first line through training and knowledge transfer to understand specifically what is a risk, what is a control, why do we need to perform these, and why and how they add value to the organization. And that should be underpinned by equipping your second and third line functions with knowledge around change management so that everybody in the function, everybody in the business is speaking the same language around risk, same language around control, and all pulling in the same direction and setting the tone for the culture that you have. If you come to the culture piece. The 4 pieces around technology and data. And I mean, one of the things that you need to have as with developing a robust controls, risk and controls model is capability to bring the organization along with controls that are fit for purpose, that are easy to execute and easy to test afterwards. And technology enablement, as Dan will talk to us about, is very, very key to that. I was coming on to the last piece on this is around culture. And again, very, very difficult to develop an operating model for large organizations with evolving risk landscapes and different regulatory, consumer, customer, and stakeholder needs. So there's a couple of things, a couple of tricks that we can do. First of all is, winning over the hearts and minds of your first layer of defense, everybody working together to understand the need and to operate the control, which is very critical. having a combined goal for your organization is to set up the business for success. So we're not here as control practitioners or risk and control practitioners to create challenges or just to write reports for the sake of it. We're here to protect the business and make sure that the business can go and deliver on its objectives. So Linda, I think that kind of wraps it from a controls framework piece and an operating model and culture piece. Very important factors, and they sit close by some of Dan's comments on technology enablement.
Yeah, thanks, Kieran. We don't often get to talk about hearts in internal controls, so nice to bring in the love. So maybe Dan, just to build on that, you know, what are the tools and technologies that you can use to build out the future of controls?
Yeah, so I thought I'd use a real life example of a client I'm working with at the moment. So they have effectively translated the previous content that I was talking around the technology ecosystem into their world, and they're looking to build out this vision that's up on the screen now over the next 2 to 3 years. And actually, it's an interesting one because ultimately they have made massive strides in the right-hand side of this diagram. So typically stuff that you would think is a little bit further down the maturity path than actually getting a GRC platform up and running. But actually we're working with them on integrating the excellent work that they've done around the monitoring of control analytic capability over their core ERP systems, even RPA, driving certain business processes, performing controls, etc. But actually taking a step back and helping them to define their risk taxonomy and their control environment, so that all of these risk domains that are listed in the left-hand side of that diagram on the screen are all talking the same language. So in there, they've got multiple different tools that are now all going to be linked together by a common ERM, enterprise risk management taxonomy, and a system that sits over the top of a number of GRC solutions that are feeding enterprise risk management with the information that it needs to actively monitor risk across the organization, but still giving flexibility to each of the various risk domains to use the tooling that they need and the specialist tooling that they need to manage their risks effectively. So this is slightly different to maybe something that you were thinking, right, we need one core GRC platform. Actually, this is an example of where we're bringing multiple tools and technologies together to form this ecosystem of an integrated GRC system that ultimately becomes the ERP for risk, if you like. And then we're working with them to then link in their excellent work, as I already said, around CCM risk and control monitoring, and actually informing this ERP for risk with the alerts that are coming out of that monitoring, so that they can directly raise issues against controls or directly raise risks into that system that are automatically generated by the analytic or by an AI or by machine learning. And then actually all of the mitigation, all of the remediation work is all captured within that GRC system. So they just to describe their environment, they've got multiple SAP environments from an ERP perspective. They've got various upstream systems for billing, upstream systems for procurement and buying, etc. And they're basically pulling information from all of those assets into one data lake that sits alongside their core ERP system and building out a set of monitoring analytics, dashboarding, etc., that then they can build alerting capability onto the side of that pumps that straight into the GRC system, but also alerts people as to this risk is arising. And they have a vision whereby they want to harness the power of AI over time as they continually see use cases for it to sort of predict risk and control and emerging risks? And actually, can we get ahead of this before actually something serious happens? And the other thing that we're looking at with them is extending that analytic capability and automation to have automated testing tools and RPA that automatically assures a good chunk of the RACM. So where you've got configured controls within a system, where you've got some of the IT general controls perhaps that are supporting ICFR, for example, can we use automation to automatically attest the controls and pump that back into that ERP for risk? And actually, you don't need to go and do a load of retrospective manual testing and gathering evidence, because the automation has done it for you. And then over the top of all of this, I mentioned it in my first section, having that lens across all of this for the different layers, lines of defense. Everybody in the organization is sharing this asset. So you've got your internal audit department that historically acted as an independent, sharing the data that's coming out of this so that they can have a dynamic audit plan, so that they can look at the emerging risks coming out of the organization and say, right, there's something happening there, let's go do some targeted work there, rather than this quite rigid 1-year audit plan going forwards.
So in that sense, Dan, we can map our tools and enablement to the existing 3 lines of defense.
Yeah, that's right. So if we just flick on a slide, so taking a typical ICFR example, you've got your finance operations that are performing the business processes, they're using workflow, reminders, tracking, etc., and the control automation to do their job. And they're feeding all of that information into this integrated risk management solution. The second line of defense actively using that information to assure, to monitor areas of over and under control, looking at enhancing the framework, but they can do that in a really targeted way. And then all of this feeding up into one view of enterprise risk across an organization. So your ERM functions or your GRC functions are able to give the board or the audit committee integrated assurance right across the organization, because ultimately they have all of the data available to them to do that. So this is the vision. It's integrating the 3 lines of defense using technology that's existed for a while, but then integrating in new analytic capability, AI eventually, but having this whole ecosystem of technology supporting the common 3 line of defense model.
Okay, thanks, Dan. We might just park there for a minute. We do have another poll question, which we wanted just to get feedback from the attendees today. So, based on what Dan and Kieran have been talking about, which of the following areas should be the most significant focus for your organization going forward? So is it the controls framework itself, kind of building out the risk and control matrices? Is it the culture and operating model to support and embed that? Or is it the technology ecosystem? So we'll just give you a couple of seconds just to reflect and record your answers. And just while you're doing that, just a reminder, we are coming into the open Q&A in the next couple of minutes. So if you do have any questions, please pop them into the chat box and we'll try our best to get to as many of them as possible. So Clara, can we just see if we have the answers? Yeah, very good. So I suppose almost half of you saying that it's the technology ecosystem, which I suppose, it isn't surprising, given that requires not only investment of time, but also investment of people, of significant resources and financial resources. And then Sorry, go on, Kieran.
I think, Linda, what I might do actually is reflect the number of organisations or respondents today that were sitting in the defined and upwards. So they already have their risk control frameworks defined, and now they're looking to build that with a technology ecosystem that's fit for purpose and that brings them, right up to current technology enablement capabilities. So I think that's probably reflects that a little bit. It's interesting to see that there's a bit of work around culture and operating model for lots of organisations also. Very interesting.
Yeah, no, definitely. And I suppose then, with that in mind, Kieran, there is a significant uplift, here for the future of controls. So, what are the benefits of doing this to an organization?
Yeah, I mean, we've got some on the slide here. I mean, the first piece is it's not just about risk management alone, okay? There's lots of underpinning benefits to going on this future of controls journey. And we'll touch off a number of these. I mean, look, to state the obvious, the cost challenges are really unprecedented. We've been looking at, almost double-digit inflation now for a couple of years. The gas crisis last winter has created a number of problems for organizations, which are heavy users of energy. So optimizing the cost of control, not just reducing it, is very key in an environment where the number of controls or the number of risk domains we need to manage is continually increasing, and they're being reinforced by regulatory requirements around things like climate, around things like cyber and cyber risk. So our view or our research and some of the work that we've done over the past number of years tells us that going on this journey can reduce or optimize the cost of controls by more than 30%. And that includes by taking a look at your existing risk framework, reassessing your risk based on your risk appetite, and try and drill those down to the ones that actually really matter to your business, and then putting appropriate controls standing up against those that are technology enabled and not just manual detective type controls, which are going to be difficult to implement and difficult to test afterwards and challenging to test afterwards. I suppose in terms of the cost of control, if you think about the iceberg for a minute, I mean, your second and third line functions is pretty straightforward to calculate the cost of those because they're predefined members of your teams or contractors, and they sit at the tip of the iceberg. But actually the real cost of operating a controls framework sits in your first line, and that's the bottom of the iceberg. That's where your finance people, your cyber people, your climate teams, your people on the ground in your finance and non-finance teams and your IT teams come together to operate the controls. It's very hard to track that or calculate it, but we do have a methodology around that. And some of the numbers that you get out at the end of it, reaching to the tens and tens of millions of euros for larger organizations, are truly eye-watering. So anything you can do to optimize those and potentially reinvest those sums then in the enablement piece and investing in your culture and your training for your risk and control teams can really help your organization. Automation, which is absolutely fundamental, and we see targets now for organizations who are going on this journey who stayed at the outside of their project. Our North Star is 70 or 80% automation in the process. So that's what they're going to. They don't want a huge amount of manual intervention or manual controls. They want the systems that they've invested in to be maximized in order to achieve the automation expectations that they wish to have. And I mean, purpose, I mean, in terms of your culture and your purpose, your ownership, your accountability, that's a big benefit. If you can really define your processes, define your risk, define your controls, and make sure that those are all kind of tying back to your objectives for your organization. So delivering with purpose and delivering on your objectives in that way can be really benefit to a future controls journey such as this. So anybody thinking about going on this journey or wishing to invest in this area, I think trying to quantify the benefits is important. Ascertain the true cost of control within your organization, engage your key stakeholders, the people at the top who can may potentially see a value in this one as the businesses grow, as businesses digitize, and the ability for manual controls and manual risk management capabilities to manage the risks that you guys are dealing with evolves and changes and reduces. Meaning you're going to need more digital and technological enablement to address those risks. And then define your scope and objective. How far do you want this to go? Where do you want to invest? And what are your priorities as a business? I mean, we can maybe take a look at that during Q&A. But there may be some challenges around, the size of the scale of this and how we can bring it back to something a bit more manageable.
Yeah, thanks, Kieran. And I mean, I suppose you've touched on it, but like, how can control practitioners build out their business case to get the organization to invest in this?
Well, I mean, I think proof of concepts. I mean, we've seen organizations take pretty big chunks out of this, and we've also seen them take kind of smaller chunks out of it, focusing on specific areas. We're working on it with a client at the moment, which is very focused on the revenue cycle and trying to get future controls mindset built into that area. It's a very topical area for them. The controls aren't very well developed at the moment, but they're really looking to improve this, and they want the response or the actions around this to be tech enabled. And they can see the value in that, because right now they're investing a huge amount of first line resources in reconciliations, in review, and correcting errors at period end, which with a more tech enabled automated process could really add value and reduce the cost of operating that process and operating the controls within that process.
Okay, thanks, Kieran, for that. So we are moving into kind of the open Q&A forum now of today's session. So if you haven't already put your question into the chat box, please do. And I'll just kick off kind of with the first one that came in. So in your experience, what type of pitfalls have you seen and how have clients overcome these? Kieran, maybe we could start with you.
I think the big one is going after the complete risk suite one off. I mean, that's probably too big an ask for most organizations without endless resources. So I think taking it in bite size, as I mentioned, taking it in bite sized chunks, prioritizing your risk domains to figure out which are the ones where which are the weakest, and which poses an inherent threat to the organization, and building your future of controls journey on that area to get that button down, then doing your assessment of your benefits afterwards and the value that you've derived from that investment in a particular area before going forward. I think that's one of the pitfalls that I've seen, and the answer to that is to do it in bite-sized chunks. Dan, anything from you?
Yeah, I think from a technology perspective, it's having disparate technology strategies. It doesn't necessarily matter that you've got disparate tools, as long as your various second line functions, your third line functions, first line functions are all aiming towards the same common goal. And I think over the top of that everybody is talking the same language. So the definition of the risk taxonomy, the way in which controls aggregate risks and risks aggregate into, enterprise risk reporting, everything needs to be talking the same language. And a lot of pitfalls I've seen where, there's internal battles between different second line functions as to how certain things should be done, and you'll never realize that full end-to-end technology ecosystem vision if that common strategy isn't in place.
Okay, thanks guys. There's a lot of chatter around artificial intelligence, machine learning, ChatGPT. What does this functionality mean for controls?
Yeah, so I'll take broader AI first. So machine learning's been used for quite a while, actually, in a lot of control environments, probably without you knowing. So there's a lot of platforms now and built into ERP systems, fraud prevention controls that are operating machine learning algorithms to detect certain triggers. So, for example, I've seen a client use it very well, looking at spend and supplier spend, whereby instead of having quite strict prescripted CCM rules or analytics that are run over a data set, they run a machine learner, and the machine learner is able to detect things perhaps you wouldn't think about as a human being defining some analytics. So, for example, one of the great examples they shared with me was actually there was a supplier that they were paying on average about 10,000 euros a month. That suddenly jumped to 10 million. It had all gone through the appropriate approvals, etc. But on the face of it, that's just strange. Now, it actually ended up being an error, which wasn't captured by anything else other than AI, and that was fed back into their risk and control framework, into their GRC solution, and remediation action taken off the back of that, and new controls implemented. So that's just one application of machine learning. And then I think ChatGPT is a very interesting topic. I think the full benefit is yet to be realized, but I've started to talk to clients around how they can use it to quality assure their risk and control matrices. So what it's very good at is text analysis. So you could ask it questions like, does this control adequately mitigate this risk? And what it's doing is it's looking at the semantics of the way that you've written your control descriptions to see whether it has the wording in it, the verbiage, to mitigate the risk. And that's just one application that I've seen people starting to explore how they can use that generative capability.
Okay. Thanks, Dan. Anything to add, Kieran? Or
I'm just fascinated to see where this goes. I think there is potential for it to do things like explain unresolved differences in controls and spit out that answer to you. So I'm really interested to see where it goes. I'm on a global working group here at Deloitte where we're looking at use cases for specific controls. So I think that it's not years away. I think it's probably months away before we start seeing clients use this more and more.
very good. Another question from the attendees today. Does this mainly apply to internal controls over financial reporting?
Absolutely not, Linda. That's one component of it. I think we've got a very important component of it, and I suppose lots of people on this call here, be they in US listed organizations or other listed organizations, will have that at the back of their mind. Kind of the typical genesis behind your controls framework is your listing requirements around internal controls over financial reporting. But I mean, when you couple in and we're talking mood music here, what the SEC in the US is saying around cybersecurity, what they're saying about ESG, what the EU are saying, what your regulators are saying. I mean, the number of controls that organizations have to manage on a day-to-day basis means that this is, and I mean total controls and the total business risks means that this is very important for all businesses, even those that don't have internal controls over financial reporting or SOX requirements. And I think one of the clients we recently met, they had a control framework with over 5,000 controls in it. Another client recently had 10,000 controls in a control framework. I mean, huge numbers, very difficult to manage all those without a proper plan around those and a strategy around those. Obviously, those are larger organizations. Not every organization will have that volume, but still, it does take a lot of effort, and that's why we believe this is a very important project initiative to go on.
Okay, thanks, Kieran. Unfortunately, that's all the time we have for questions today. Definitely some more interesting ones coming in. So I'll just pass over to Dave now to close the session for us.
Super. Thanks, Linda. Look, hopefully people found that enjoyable and insightful. As Linda said, there's just in the last couple of seconds there's a load more questions after coming in. So as I said, look, this is the first of a series of these. We'll consolidate that and see if we can pull out some themes, and as well, obviously we will be sharing the recording on Thursday for people to listen back. I think acknowledging, you know, the large group we had here, actually there's quite a degree of variation in relation to people's maturity on this topic, but obviously I think it's obviously very clear as well there's big opportunities for every organization to sort of grab this and make it more efficient in terms of as the organization develops, that the control environment needs to develop as well. A couple of key call outs to me, obviously, I think the guys have touched on it, you know, we do really need to evaluate our key controls. We've lots and lots of clients who are looking at things now and going, as I said, we've hundreds and hundreds of key controls. They're not key controls. So I think that's a first starting point, is really to sort of hold a flashlight to that or a spotlight to your key controls and really evaluate what are key controls. The next one is Kieran referenced it specifically in relation to culture, and we really need to see a change in people's attitude. One of the questions that we didn't get to was really around, I suppose, if I read it here, you know, if you're new to this, how do you convince the business who are in a sort of a busy time to sort of really, I suppose, devote time on this, and that you're not sort of, as the person said, banging your head against a brick wall trying to get them to get on board. For me, that is the culture point. They see controls, I suppose, as part of their responsibility, that it's not it is actually part of BAU. It's not an add-on. But I think how you get that to happen is people understand the controls are additive to their organization. They see the benefits of doing it, and they see the pitfalls of not doing it. I think that's the key point. It's just changing that culture that they don't see controls as an add-on to their job. They really see it as part of their job, and that will help you with that sort of that cultural shift and getting people to buy into it. And then look, we've had lots of questions and lots of discussions on technology. And look, we need to adopt, it's using RPAs to test the controls or use machine learning to risk scan as examples. Dan gave a couple more. But I think as Kieran said, this is something that is imminent. It's changing rapidly in terms of what we're seeing. We see it every day in the headlines. The emergence of new AI and ChatGPT, it's here to stay. So it's really how we adopt that and how we use it sensibly. I think obviously, I'm sure lots of people like me have scribbled down Kieran's carrot of 30% savings. Pretty significant for any organization, but again, obviously that was a client who had a massive project in this space. But it does show, I suppose, the payoff that is there when people really do focus on it. I said, look, this is the first of a series, so look, really appreciate your input so far. We'll reflect on some of the other questions to say, but if there is any other suggestions, please do send them on. As always, if you have queries, any other questions, anything we can help with, we're always here to help. So please do reach out to ourselves directly. And then finally, just a thank you. Thank you, obviously, to Linda, Kieran, and Dan for their insights and bringing us through the last hour or so. But obviously, a thank you for everybody as well for joining us this afternoon. And just finally, just to wish everyone, hope everyone has the rest of a good day. And hopefully we'll see you all again soon in our next Future Control webinar stroke event. Thanks all. Take care.
Bye.